And welcome to this evening's URI Fall 2010 Honors Colloquium event. I have just some preliminaries for you. The usual, if you've been seeing us, you know how this goes. We have emergency exits there and there in the back on the sides and up here in the front. Our restrooms for gentlemen are in this door to my right in the back and down the stairs, and for ladies, it's the door to my left and down the stairs. If you joined us last week, you caught Kareem Shora, Senior Policy Analyst for the Department of Homeland Security. Next week, we'll be having Sut Jolly, Doctor of Communication Studies from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and also founder of the Media Education Foundation, who makes many of the educational videos lots of professors here use in their classes, so I'm sure we're familiar with his output. Tonight, to introduce our guests, we have Rosaria Pisa.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I am thrilled to introduce Leo Chavez, Professor of Anthropology at the University of California at Irvine, and the Director of the Center for Research on Latinos in a Global Society, as well as the Chicano Latino Studies Program. Professor Chavez's important contributions to scholarship on migration studies has engaged both me and my students in a nuanced consideration of what is one of the most critical issues of our time: human migration. Human migration is a global phenomenon that contributes in myriad ways to an increasingly interconnected world. Yet, in many corners of the world, not just the US, segments of the native population perceive migrants as threat. In the US, one salient example, of the consequences of such perceptions is the recent legislation in Arizona limiting the right of movement among the undocumented. Dr. Chavez has been engaged in immigration research for the last 25 years. He began his inquiry with an ethnographic study of the lives of Mexican and Central American undocumented workers in San Diego, culminating in his seminal book, Shadowed Lives: Undocumented Immigrants in American Society, published in 1992. Since 9/11, much has been published on unauthorized migration, and this new work is indebted to Dr. Chavez's brave and deeply felt account of the lives of those who live and work among us in the shadows. Since Shadowed Lives, Professor Chavez has focused his lens on media coverage of immigrants and immigration issues in the US. In covering immigration, popular images, and the politics of the nation, Professor Chavez draws our attention to the role of Mexican magazine covers of magazines like Time and Newsweek in shaping our perceptions of immigrants and the national debate on immigration. He expands on this work with his newest book, The Latino Threat: Constructing Immigrants, Citizens, and the Nation. Here, Professor Chavez goes deeper into the anti-Latino discourse that permeates our airwaves and challenges us to consider how citizenship and the nation are being redefined to the exclusion of our neighbors. I invite Dr. Chavez to the podium to share with us his most recent reflections on the state of our national conversation on immigrants and immigration reform. Please give a welcome to Dr. Leo Chavez.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Let me say, first of all, thank you for inviting me to Rhode Island. I haven't really been here very much, and it's really absolutely beautiful weather, so thank you. And I'd like to thank the Honors Program for asking me to come talk. It's really a pleasure to be here. The students today grilled me. I'm already exhausted, but I'll give this talk anyway. And most of all, I'd like to thank all of you who came out, because I know the Celtics are playing Miami, and it's probably very hard. If the Lakers are playing the Celtics or Miami, no one would be here. So it's a real pleasure to see you here. I'm going to be talking about why immigration reform is so difficult. And part of what I'm going to look at that makes it so complex is this idea, what I call the idea that Latinos have been constructed as a threat to the nation. Basically, the question that the United States faces right now is a question that many of the industrialized nations in the world are facing, and that is, what does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to be French? What does it mean to be Russian? What does it mean to be Italian? What does it mean to be Japanese? What does it mean to be part of a nation? And by nation, I mean the people, like the Cherokee nation, the French nation, the American people, not necessarily the state complex, but really us. And the question really comes down to, if I was to ask you to stand up and put a circle around your feet like this, and I say, now who do you include in that circle around you? Who's in with you? Who's part of this nation that you call us? Who are we? Well, that's what it means to be part of a nation. Who are we? And basically, immigration reform is about who do we allow to become part of that circle, to become part of our nation? Who do we see as having the kind of qualities that we think are part of the kind of people we want to be with us? Immigration reform is nothing but that question. Immigration reform is nothing like this room as a metaphor for the nation, and that door being immigration reform and the laws about immigration, who we let into that door to join us in our nation as part of us, the people. And that's what we're debating right now. It's a very difficult issue, and it's not one that's probably going to be settled in the next couple of years, but it's fundamentally the most important question, particularly for the young people in this audience, because how you come to decide what it means to be part of a nation and how you're going to incorporate people into the nation is going to be something that you're going to have to deal with all of your lives. I can guarantee you now, the factors that are, in a sense, motivating people to cross international borders to work are not going to cease in your lifetime. Definitely not going to cease in my lifetime. So what we're talking about today here is not something that's meaningless. It's not something that's fleeting. It's something profound, enduring, and something that basically is something in your lifetime as students you're going to have to deal with for the rest of your lives. How you answer this question, who gets to be an American, is a fundamentally important question for you and for us as a people. Now, it's difficult to answer this question because there's so many factors that are so emotionally volatile. One, of course, is the idea that they're undocumented immigrants or unauthorized immigrants, or as some people would say, illegal immigrants. And the question is, do they get to join the circle? They're in the door already. The issue is, even though they're in the door and they're seated among us, are they going to be part of us? And that's a difficult question, but it's one that needs to be answered. But it has some complications that make it, I say, basically foggy in terms of our reasoning, because it doesn't allow us to sharpen our focus on this question. Very difficult. I could give you, I'm only asked to talk about 45 minutes, but I could talk all day on these factors, but I'm only going to talk about two. One of the problems is that in a nation of immigrants, which we are, we often look at yesterday's immigrants through rose-colored glasses. What do I mean by this? I mean, we forget the kind of turmoil caused by earlier waves. We often see those in the contemporary discourse or discussion or the politics. Those were the good immigrants. And for whatever criteria you want to use, they did it the right way. They came, they wanted to be American. They took off their ethnic clothing, metaphorically, and just jumped in to be an American. They lost their language. They just couldn't wait to be American, and we opened our doors to them and embraced them, and they became Americans, and that's the great American story. It is a great story. But these rose-colored glasses don't often reflect the difficulty past immigrant groups faced, even in a nation of immigrants. And I bring this up because it's hard to talk about contemporary immigrants without putting it into a little bit of historical context. My historian friends say I never do enough, but I don't have that much time. The way we talk about, or we in academia call discourse, the assumptions we create and pass among each other in a discourse about the past, is that the past immigrants who came made us who we were, and they're who we are today. That's fundamentally what we mean when we say we are a nation of immigrants. It's our identity. It's who we are. Here you have Little Italy in New York City, Mulberry Street. You can go and take a tenement tour now and see how they all live like Ralph Cramden and the honeymooners up here in these cramped little apartments. It was so hot, so dusty, and so miserable, everyone lived in the streets. Today, of course, most of these Italians are gone. It's now Chinatown, a lot of Koreans. You can still take the tours. But it was so difficult for these Italians, who were not seen as white at the time. They were swarthy, after all. They were seen as people who couldn't integrate. They didn't want to learn the language. They wanted to live in their little ghettos. It was so hard for most of these Italians that about half of them, according to the historians who study this, went home. It was hard for people who came to this country in previous times. They were often seen, in even worse terms than today, as genetically inferior to the people who were here, that they could never really become Americans. They didn't have the stuff. The historical reality is that at the time, even Europeans were coming, in the late 1900s and early 20th century. Many people saw America as a magnet that drew in all these Europeans and some Asians, and they brought with them disease, plague, mafia, all the social diseases that people would bring from other countries. That many of these same problems we now, of course, put on contemporary immigrants. This gives you a better sense. This is basically the refuse of Europe. The Italians, the Czechoslovakians, the Polish, the Russians, the Hungarians coming. And it says here, direct from Europe, the slums of Europe daily. They were seen as so beneath us, biologically and culturally. They were actually drawn as rats, vermin coming to the shores. They were not even human. They were dehumanized. And I'll bring this up later, because to treat people as less than human, it's often good to represent them as non-human. And this, we'll see, comes up in contemporary times as well. So these are Europeans. Today, the people we think of as Americans. So the lesson, before I get into the Latino threat, is one that we need to really carry with us in our pocket. What was the historical lesson of earlier waves of migration to the United States? Number one is that migration from one country to another is always a hard process. It's never easy, both for those who leave a place and for those people who are accepting new people into their fold. And second, immigrants becoming part of a new nation, for those of us who study the movement of people, their integration into the new society is often more dependent upon the reception they receive from those people in the country they're going to than their own ambitions or their own desires. It's how big the welcoming tent is, how big the embrace, how easy it is once they get in the door to become part of that circle of we, nation, that determines the kind of positive or negative outcome for most immigrant groups. So that's the lesson. What is then this Latino threat narrative, as I call it, that I'm talking about, and how has it been constructed? Particularly through the media. Well, let me give you some examples first of what it is. And then I'll show you a little bit, and you can read my book, but I'll show you a little bit of how it was constructed over the last 40 years. And my book is available from Amazon.com and all good presses everywhere, and it's available right here, actually, too. Let me give you some examples of what the Latino threat is, in case you don't know what it is. Pat Buchanan said in 1994, some 16 years ago, what would it mean for America if, for example, South Texas and Southern California became almost exclusively Latino? Well, he says basically we'd have millions of people whose linguistic, historic, and cultural roots are in Mexico. And what you'd have then is that they would basically be loyal to their country of origin rather than to the United States. And he says basically America could see in a decade demands for a Quebec-like status for Southern California. Remember this term, Quebec-like status, because I'm going to explain to you how that gets introduced into public discourse as a little acorn of an idea, then grows into a mighty oak tree, and then gets transformed into another idea called the Reconquest, or the invasion. Now, this is 16 years ago, and as far as I know, because I live in Los Angeles, which is the heart of this Latino culture, and just to remind you, Pat Buchanan says that what would it be like in South Texas if it was mostly Latino? If you've ever been to Texas, South Texas has always been Mexican American. No one else wants to live there. It's hot, it's dirty, and it's poor. So he should probably go check that out first. But Southern California has increasingly become, once again, more Latino. 16 years later, even though there hasn't been this Quebec-like status occurring, Pat Buchanan doesn't say, I'm sorry for stigmatizing the Latino community like this. He says on MSNBC just last year, Mexico is the greatest foreign policy crisis I think America faces in the next 20, 30 years. Who is going to care 30 years from now whether a Sunni or Shia is in Baghdad and who's running in Kabul? Who's ruling in Kabul? We're going to have 135 million Hispanics in the United States by 2050, heavily concentrated in the Southwest. The question is whether we're going to survive as a country. Huge, huge. I mean, can you get any more threatening to the survival of the nation than this? Let me give you another example. There's been a huge growth across the United States in militia groups, mainly of white Americans who feel they need to protect the nation. And what's interesting for this talk are the two reasons why those who study militia groups find for that growth. One is, of course, we have a black president, and some people find that itself threatening and frightening. But the other reason for this talk is that they say that those who are engaged in these white militant groups and are arming themselves have stated that they believe there's a conspiracy of a secret Mexican plan to reclaim the Southwest and take it over by illegal immigrants. Sounds funny, but it has to come out of somewhere. It just doesn't just come out of thin air. The same place Pat Buchanan got these ideas, these militia groups have these ideas, and my point here is that it comes out of everyday media discourse about the role of Mexicans and other Latinos in the United States. This is an example of a militia group called the Minutemen that likes to patrol the border. They like to carry their guns. I call it boys with guns who get to hunt Mexicans. They think they're back in the 19th century. And, it's quite an invigorating little thing for them to do, especially to carry guns and chase people. So you have these examples all over the place. In Arizona, as we heard already, Governor Janet Brewer signed in one of the most difficult laws on immigration in the nation. And after that, she was sort of accused of making up this story about heads being cut off in the desert. No one could ever find the heads. And I made this picture before this story because I didn't mean to cut her head off here. So just to let you know, I wasn't trying to insult her on this or make fun of her. More recently, we have the hardest working guys in advertising because these three Mexicans as illegal aliens, and the threat used in politics and the ads for a number of people running for positions in posts in the United States have used the same image. I hope they're getting some sort of royalties because these three actors or whatever they were are now become famous as the illegal alien threat. That's what I mean about the Latino threat, that these images can tick off a whole set of understandings about what it means to America, as Buchanan noted, about the role of Mexicans and their children and other Latinos in the United States. Basically, what's developed over the last 40 years, and I could go back to the 19th century, but really the last 40 years really has good examples, that there's a Latino Quebec, which is now translated as a Latino Reconquest of the Southwest, if not the total United States, a takeover or invasion. Latinos don't want to integrate socially into society, which means they don't want to have friends, they don't want to intermarry, they want to remain isolated in their own little areas because, of course, they're waiting for the takeover, the reconquest. Why would you do these other things of integrating? Why would you be concerned about learning language, English, if you're waiting for a takeover? You're living in your own little community. You don't really want to be part of the larger society. You don't want to, what the old term was, assimilate. Either you don't learn English or you're incapable of learning English. Latinos are immutable, which is a really nasty thing to say. Why? Because a rock, if I took these keys in my pocket, they're immutable. They're inorganic material. I pull them out, I die, an archaeologist finds me 10,000 years from now, and they go, oh, look at those keys. Human beings are part of history. They're constantly changing as a result of that. That's what it means to be human, to change, to be part of a historical flow. To claim that people aren't part of history, they're ahistorical, places them in some sort of weird kind of position of people who just don't engage in life. So they say they're immutable. They endlessly reproduce some sort of traditional culture over and over and over ad nauseum. And why wouldn't you do that if you're waiting to take over and not really integrate and learn language? And of course, what drives all this, and actually I'm going to pay probably more attention to this than anything else today, is the fertility threat. The idea that Mexican women and other Latinas and their children are unable to control their reproductive capacity because of the dogma of the Catholic Church and the cultural values of being a woman and being a man. Having multiple children is a symbol of both those manhood and womanhood. And therefore, they're enslaved to having nothing but multiple kids their whole life. This fertility and perception of rampant fertility is what drives the Reconquest. And I'm going to show you how these ideas are so prevalent in almost everything we see in here in the media. And I'm not going to show you everything because I don't have that much time, but I'll show you hopefully enough. Let me give you an example from the 1970s. This is the American Legion magazine, which is for many of you who served in the armed forces, you know, this goes out to the veterans of the people who served our country, men and women. 1974, you have an image here on this magazine being sent to our veterans saying that our illegal alien problem, here is a major invasion of the United States. The border between the U.S. and Mexico is being destroyed, and these folkloric backward Mexicans dressed in 19th century garb, because they aren't modern like us, right? They're pre-modern people, are inundating our institutions of housing, jobs, welfare, and destroying them. You have a few Caribbean people coming in here, some Italians, maybe a couple of people from Europe, some Canadians coming in, but mainly it's the problem of the border. So the veterans are being told that mainly there's a problem. Here's the next war you may have to worry about, this invasion from the South. Now, I find this a difficult issue. For those of you who study psychology, it's a little bit of a cognitive dissonance. Why? Anybody see a problem here? It's 1974. 1974. What's going on with the United States in 1974? We're in a war in Southeast Asia. We're in a war in Southeast Asia. The veterans who are coming back in the war in Vietnam and Southeast Asia was fought by a large proportion of Mexican Americans and other Latinos who are now coming back as veterans, many wounded, like my cousin with his leg blown off in Vietnam, and now being told, you know what? You're the enemy, and the people like you are the enemy. Very interesting position, which gets repeated many times in the next 30 to 40 years. 1970s, 1981, I could show you earlier, but I'll show you this one. What does this idea, this little acorn of this Quebec metaphor come from for understanding the role of Latinos or Mexicans in the United States? Well, I'm not going to go back all the way to the 70s, but this is 1981. It's very colorful and very pretty, so I'll show it to you. This is the United States, red, white, and blue, pristine, because we don't bother anybody. You know, we wait for trouble to come to us. And here's our troubled neighbors. The French Canadian is flipping off the English-speaking Canadian, and the problem is the Quebecois independence movement, which they argue is a metaphor for these Mexicans coming out of the mountains of Oaxaca, already stepping on Chula Vista, that if they land here and are allowed to propagate, have babies, have families, create neighborhoods, pretty soon they're going to create a Quebec-like status, which we've now heard about a couple of times, in the Southwest for a takeover just like the French. So this is a cautionary tale for Americans to be ready because this is what's happening. Very interesting. National Magazine, U.S. News and World Report, focusing very clearly on a threat to the nation. Time bomb in Mexico, early 1980s, 1977, sorry. Why there'll be no end to the invasion by illegals? What's the time bomb? Anybody guess? I've already told you. Fertility. Paul Ehrlich was writing, of course, at Stanford about the population bomb right before this. It gets blown up into the Mexican fertility problem. They're waiting. They're like ants fertilizing themselves. They're getting these big termite, maybe he studied termites, termite mounds on the border, and they're going to explode, and all these Mexican babies are going to come out. And so it's a time bomb ticking on our border, waiting to explode. Now, what's interesting here is Mexico and invasion are linked together. So we have a military metaphor of invasion. Remember, your friends come over to watch the Super Bowl, drink some beer, eat some nachos, and have fun. Your enemies invade to take your land, steal your women, and destroy your way of life. So it's a very difficult relationship to a country that's our southern neighbor and at that time our leading trading partner to say they're our enemy. That's a military invasion that is occurring. But it's the fertility threat. Almost about 5 years later, U.S. News and World Report tells us again, invasion from Mexico, it just keeps growing. Now, for the students here taking psychology, hopefully you have a sense of cognitive dissonance. Why? Because once again, a military metaphor, invasion. But when we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, we did it with tanks. We had bazookas. We had hand grenades. We had rifles. I don't see anything on this invading force. But what's interesting, and remember, this magazine probably had 5,000 photographs to use that day to put on the cover. Any magazine doesn't just pick a cover image by chance. It's always to reflect the ideological position of that magazine because they're engaged in a discussion about ideas, the hearts and minds of the readers. They picked this image. Why? Look at the head of the invading force. You think it's a coincidence that the head of the invading force is a woman? The Trojan horse of reproduction? The queen bee of baby making? The most insidious invasion of all? Because once they get here, they'll have babies, create neighborhoods, have families, take over territory. Quebec, Reconquest, invasion. I mean, I wish I didn't make this stuff up. The linkages aren't clear. 1987 or so, late 80s. John Tanton, past president of Zero Population, he read the books from Stanford, and founder of the Federation for American Immigration Reform, the leading anti-immigrant group in the United States, wrote this: will the present majority peaceably hand over its political power to a group, Latin American immigrants, that is simply more fertile on the demographic point? Perhaps this is the first instance in which those with their pants up are going to get caught by those with their pants down. Fertility, invasion, reconquest, takeover. My belt is very tight, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to make these points because they become so important as we get to the more contemporary period. This is the sort of visual image that goes along with that idea that John Tanton talks about. It's a pregnant Latina because that's all she knows, and her good-for-nothing partner who sits around getting drunk or stoned all day. (1985), the year the Immigration Reform and Control Act was actually signed into being, and then later on, Congress passed it this month, and Reagan signed it the next month into being. This is what U.S. News was talking about then. And you see the red, white, and blue, which stands for the United States, and green and red, the two main colors of the Mexican flag, or the Mexican nation. Here we have colors representing the nations. The red and blue of the United States flag, which is us, the people, is already fading into the sunset of history. So you should be alarmed. What's left of the U.S., the white U.S. letters, us, whatever us means, remember I'm telling you who are us, is already on a field of green, which is the main color of the Mexican flag. The red of the Mexican flag, which represents Mexico as a nation, the colors, that the border between the white of the U.S. and the red of Mexico has dissolved, and Mexico is purging its blood into the U.S. And if you don't get it, there's little folkloric Mexicans like 19th century peasants moving north. And then you can read it because it tells you exactly what they're saying. Will the Mexican migration create a new nation, a Quebec? The disappearing border. Now, just to show you I'm not making this stuff up, this is what the article said that went along with this image. Now sounds the march of the new conquistadors in the American Southwest. The heirs of Cortez and Coronado are rising again in the land their forebears took from the Indians and lost to the Americans. Their movement is, despite its quiet and largely peaceful nature, they're going to trick us because they are peaceful folk, both an invasion and a revolt. At the vanguard are those born here whose roots are generation deep, who long endured Anglo-dominance, and who are ascending within the U.S. system to take power they consider their birthright. Behind them comes the unstoppable mass, and we saw the images of that already. They're kin from below the border. Now, if you were a psychiatrist, if some of you students may become psychiatrists, imagine somebody coming into your psychiatry office, laying on a couch, and telling you a paranoid story like this. What would you do? Drugs, immediately, right? This is a ranting of a crazy person, but this magazine can tell the American public this, and no one stands up and says, wow, how deep does paranoia run? Let me show you. Look at this. Think about what you're being told here as an American public by a national magazine. You're being told that the heirs of Cortez and Coronado are rising again. Now, Cortez conquered the Aztecs in 1519 to 1521, and Coronado came up into New Mexico in the late 1500s and early 1600s. That means there's been a conspiracy among the generations of Latinos in the Southwest to take over this country that's at least 400 years old. That's an incredibly long planning process. Now, what irritates me is that I'm a descendant of Coronado. My family has lived in New Mexico since the early 1600s. My grandmother just died at 103 in the village of northern Santa Fe in an adobe house, across the adobe house she was born in, and my relatives still weave rugs for tourists like you and me. I never got the tweet. How come I never got the tweet that we're going to start attacking and take over this country? I don't get it. Why have I been left out of this? I've been here for 13 generations. I should be on the list. I've seen the movies. I've seen the movies that have satellites in space, and they can look down on the deserts of the Sahara or North Africa and see people practicing to do terrorist acts. Where are the images of Latinos in Colorado, in Texas, in New Mexico, marching to learn how to take over this country? There is no evidence, just assertion. That's interesting. And we're going to have a lot more of that in a minute. Argument by assertion, not by evidence. Not even the most minimal. I'd like to get the tweet. Time Magazine, 1990. What's happened in 1990? Well, it's what anthropologists always look for, a key phrase. 1990, the demographic changes that were coming to the United States as a result of the 1965 immigration law that opened up our border to everybody in the world, and the kind of movement of people as a result of our meddling in places like Korea, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. All these people start coming back. By 1990, the projections of demographic change become widely evident. And the fear here is that whites will no longer be a majority. The phrase that comes into common practice is the browning of America. That becomes the big fear in the 1990 discourse. Here you have blacks as a threat. Look at this flag. It's the flag of the United States. And you'll notice the whites are gone in the stars. That's supposed to tell you in the nation, whites are no longer here because of demographic change. The white of the stripes is being squeezed out by colors, which in the pigment of our imagination on race means people, I guess. So blacks are a threat, but they're kind of a small threat because they're natives after all, and their fertility levels are relatively like whites. Browns, I guess, are Latinos. They're the second biggest threat, and Asians are the biggest threat. This irritates me too. Why aren't Latinos given the biggest threat? Asians, they're growing rapidly, but they have a small base. So they're going to get 8-10% of the population, 2050. Latinos are a big base, and if you're worried about what used to be called miscegenation, the loss of definition between these colors, Latinos are your problem. Because Latinos marry anybody, anytime, any place. There's no one-child rule for Latinas. There's no one-drop rule. It's only how good do they look. And so basically, let me show you here. Time Magazine thought this story was so important because hopefully you see what's going on here. This is a national magazine. It's not the Ku Klux Klan telling its readers, if you're white, we got to tell you something and warn you because these colors people, brown, white, and yellow people, are pushing you out of the country, out of the nation. So if you're brown, white, brown, black, or yellow, you're the enemy. Don't buy this magazine. It's not for you. Because we're warning white people. I mean, this is an incredibly divisive image. And if you think I'm making it up, this is a weekly. It comes and goes in a week. Time magazine thought this was so important, they actually created an advertisement to put in People magazine and other places to warn white Americans of the impending doom of the browning of America. And here you have it. Hey, Whitey. Once again, it's not the Ku Klux Klan talking here, these divisive comments. Hey, Whitey, your turn at the back of the bus. Sometime soon, white Americans will become a distinct minority in a largely brown cultural and racial mix. I'm an anthropologist. I've never seen a brown culture, but I guess that's what it is. And you have all these brown babies, maybe one Asian baby, maybe one African-American baby. But the point is, it's all these brown babies, and this is the problem. There's only one white baby. So Time magazine felt this is such an important story that they had to tell Americans, you better watch out because of the demographic changes that are coming. Now, for me, there's still power. So those babies, it's going to take a long time before you have a mariachi president. When that happens, I know there's demographic shift. But if you listen to Fox News or read Foreign Policy or any of these other, or listen to the radio, the problem is, and people are recognizing our lower fertility rates, which I'll talk about more in a second, and the problem is we need to have more babies. But you'll notice when they ask more babies wanted, it's now not a mixture of different kinds of babies, it's only one. Because it's keeping the browning of America in check, which is the concern here. Now, remember, I come from a state where whites are already a minority, and it hasn't sunk into the ocean yet, just to let you know. Atlantic Monthly, probably one of the most respected middle-of-the-road magazines in America, 1994. An article by one of the most respected historians in America at Stanford University, my alma mater. He talks about the Reconquista. Mexican Americans can, if they choose, preserve their distinctive culture indefinitely. They're immutable. They don't change. No desire to become part of the nation. No desire to integrate. They preserve their culture indefinitely as if that was humanly possible. They can challenge the existing cultural, political, legal, commercial, and educational systems to change fundamentally not only the language, but also the very institutions in which they do business. And here's the key part. If we seek historical guidance, the closest example we have at hand is in the diagonally opposite corner of North American continent in Quebec. The possibility looms that in the next generation or so, we will see a kind of Chicano Quebec take shape. Why does the Stanford professor say that? Because it's being said now for 2 decades with no evidence, no proof. And if he was in my class and he put forth his thesis with no evidence, I'd flunk him. But he's still being paid by Stanford University. These ideas get tossed out as little seeds in the public discourse that then get repeated, not just on radio, not just on television, but by famous nationally and internationally recognized historians at a place like Stanford University. That's what we call taking something for granted and assuming it's true, rather than now taking the responsibility to look at some facts and some empirical data to test it. Business Week, which is usually a pro-immigration magazine because immigrants create value, has pointed out here Hispanic nation, Quebec, right? Immigrants are an immigrant group like no other. Their huge numbers are changing old ideas about assimilation. Why? Because they don't want to assimilate like those old Italians, the Hungarians, the Czechoslovakians, right? They're different. But it looks to me like this family just came out of Walmart or someplace. They don't look much different than your average working class American family. Samuel Huntington, who's now dead, of course, has written tremendously on the Islamic threat. And then he happened to cast his eye on Latinos. I wish he hadn't, but he had. Jose, can you see? I don't even know how to finish that. Samuel Huntington on how Hispanic immigrants threaten America's identity, values, and way of life. I'll only show you one of his comments because I'm running out of time and it's probably enough. He said in 2004, in this new era, the single most immediate and most serious challenge to America's traditional identity comes from immense and continuing immigration from Latin America, especially from Mexico, and the fertility rates of those immigrants compared to black and white American natives. When I read, not this one, but the earlier one he said in about 1996, I wrote him a letter. I said, Dear Dr. Huntington, I know Harvard Square is a great place. Come out to California and experience America. We'll have some sushi, maybe some tacos, we'll enjoy life, see what diversity is in America. He never wrote back. And because he's too invested in creating this and supporting this image that the greatest single threat and challenge comes from Latin America and especially from Mexico. Once again, 2004. What's going on in 2004? We're in a war in Iraq. We're in a war in Afghanistan. The Taliban is still going around messing things up a little bit. And Osama bin Laden is still flipping us the finger. But the Harvard professor of government has the gall to tell us that the most serious challenge is not any of those issues. It's the guys who are growing your food, cooking your food, taking care of your kids, taking care of your elders, and doing all the millions of other little things people do. That's interesting to me. That's incredibly interesting to me because when I pick up the LA Times and open it up and look at the obituaries, every day I see Latinos who have died in Afghanistan, died in Iraq, for the right of this professor to stigmatize their value to this country. It's an incredibly sad story. When is somebody, he's dead now, somebody should have stood up and said, shame on you. Shame on you. Well, as an anthropologist, I like to look to popular culture. Here is Lalo Akadaz, who has a cartoon in the LA Times, who talks directly to Huntington and says, whoever still thinks Latinos won't ever assimilate has never been to your Uncle Frankie's 4th of July carne asada cookout. Why? His Uncle Frankie's a Vietnam vet. He wears a t-shirt that says, these colors don't run. We fought to protect this country. I've had relatives fight in every country since the Civil War. One of my relatives was a hero of the Civil War in New Mexico. I've had relatives die, be maimed, serve distinguishedly and not get hurt, unfortunately, in every war since then. And yet, we're being told for decades that we're the problem in this country? Pretty interesting to me. Now, we come to the fact of this fertility threat, and what do we do with these new babies? Well, we create new concepts as we talk about new subject positions. The word anchor baby has become part of contemporary discourse. And I personally think, well, I'll get to that in a second. What's an anchor baby? They're basically all these women coming across the border to have babies so they become American citizens. Michelle Malkin, a pundit both in the internet and on Fox News and everywhere else, really helped get this idea going. And she said in 2004, during my book tour across the country for Invasion, of course, by Mexicans and others, this issue of anchor babies came up time and again. In the Southwest, everyone has the story of a heavily pregnant woman crossing the Mexican border to deliver anchor babies. At East Coast hospitals, tales of South Korean obstetric tourists abound. An estimated 5,000 South Korean anchor babies are born in the U.S. every year, and of course, there's a terrorism angle. The idea being, once the babies are born, they'll ship them off to be trained as terrorists and put bombs in their diapers and send them back. Now, I've had 2 kids. I know there's bombs in those diapers, but I'm not sure how. Senator Lindsey Graham made it much more vivid, Republican from South Carolina. They come here to drop a child. And here you have the image, of course, the lazy Mexican against the cactus, the border fence, and a woman crossing to drop her baby. Now, what's the problem with this? Cats drop their babies. Humans deliver their children. It's a verbal metaphor of dehumanization to make them equivalent to the animals around us every day that drop their babies, not deliver their babies. Dehumanize, treat them in a dehumanized way. What do we do now with these anchor babies? Well, there's a whole movement now to get rid of what we call birthright citizenship, to somehow repeal the 14th Amendment, which guarantees citizenship by birth, what we call jus soli, right? The right to citizenship through birth. One of the things that makes America great is that you don't have to have the blood of your father to be an American, like many countries. You don't have to have the blood of your father to be an American. Think about that. If you're 4th generation Korean in Japan. You don't even know what Korea looks like. You don't even speak Korean. You speak Japanese. You're Korean with a passport. That's what that means. You're a Filipina. You have a baby in Saudi Arabia. That baby is not Saudi because the father is not Saudi, unless he claims it, I guess. But you have to have the blood. Most countries of the world, many countries of the world have that. We don't. What's ironic is the same people who say, don't mess with the Constitution, are all for repealing the 14th Amendment. I don't understand how to jive with that contradiction. But Indian birthright citizenship, as Senator Russell Pierce has basically promoted, and others, you get these images then of women crossing the border, once again, the female threat, reproduction, their babies as a threat to this nation. Some of the problems with that issue for me is that it takes 21 years to even begin to think of sponsoring someone. That's an incredible lot of planning. I think America would do really well if people had that much foresight and planning. But the second thing is, the 1996 immigration law made it very difficult to sponsor, even if you did wait 21 years. Remember, the law Bill Clinton signed into law in 1996? Incredibly difficult to sponsor. You had to be pretty well off to serve as a sponsor. Working class people and poor people, almost by definition, can't sponsor someone. And for those of us who study immigration, having babies is not why usually people come here. It's usually a secondary effect of migration, which means they come to work and then they fall in love and get married and have babies or something like that along those lines. Let me give you an example of some famous anchor babies in case we forget what history means to us. Some right here. What would happen if the Native Americans would have claimed anchor babies and sent you all back? Andrew Jackson, interestingly enough, was an anchor baby. His parents were Irish immigrants, straight from the old land. What would have happened in late 1900s, 1800s, early 1900s, when all those Europeans were seen as so negative and so difficult to become American, when you had people like Francis Walker, superintendent of the census of 1870 and 1889, the guy who gets the data on immigrants and the people of the nation, saying this about the children of European immigrants. Although born among us, our general instinctive feeling testifies that they are not wholly of us. So separate has been their social life, due alike to their clannishness and to our reserve. So strong has been the ties of race and blood and religion with them, so acute has been the jealousy of their spiritual teachers to our institutions, that we think of them and speak of them as foreigners. Who's he talking about? The Russian Jews, the Hungarians, the Czechoslovakians, the Latvians, the Italians, the Greeks. Who would we have on television today? Jerry Seinfeld wouldn't be here. What if they took these views and implemented a repeal of the 14th Amendment at this time? I could give you examples all over the country, but let's just take one of the examples all of us know. Let's take the Supreme Court of the United States of America. What if, given these views, we would have implemented a repeal of the 14th Amendment at this time? Antonin Scalia wouldn't be here. His father was born in Italy. He's an anchor baby. I kind of wish he wasn't there. But I'm not going to get into politics. Samuel Alito, anchor baby, father born in Italy. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, anchor baby, father is a Russian immigrant. Ronald Reagan, he wasn't an anchor baby, but his grandfather claims was an anchor baby, actually. His great-grandparents came from Tipperary, Ireland, and he always liked to joke that they basically jumped off the ship. His great-grandfather jumped off a ship, was an illegal immigrant from Ireland. The problem is that once you start messing with the Constitution, now, and yet not think about what the implications would have been then, nothing but hypocrisy comes forward. Michelle Malkin, who really emphasized the whole idea of the anchor baby, was born on October 20th, 1970 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to parents from the Philippines who happened to be in the United States on student visas. And those who want to repeal the 14th Amendment say you have to have at least one U.S. citizen to be she's an anchor baby. The great thing about America, you only have to be here 2 weeks before someone else and you're a native and they're a foreigner. That's what I love. That's a great thing about America. The Latino threat narrative, then, to end up. Latinos basically want to reconquer the Southwest, They don't want to integrate socially. They don't want to learn English. They're immutable. They never change. Why would they change? They don't want to be part of the nation. Why change? Why think about the impact of all the ideas around them? And the fertility is out of control. And I'm a social scientist, so just let me end by giving you some examples. I live in the new Ellis Island, Southern California. There are more Mexican people of Mexican origin than anywhere in the world outside of Mexico City. We have people from Korea, the Philippines, every place of the world. So I have the fortune to have been on two large studies. One, looking at the adult children of immigrants all over Southern California, called the IMLA study. We got an obnoxious amount of money from the Russell Sage Foundation. And we looked at the children of immigrants in a random survey, all the way from Thousand Oaks and Ventura County, all the way to San Bernardino, almost 5,000 interviews. And I thought, well, I must be able to find some evidence for what distinguished scholars, radio talk show hosts, and media pundits have been saying for 30, 40 years. I also did a similar study in Orange County on 800 Latinos and 400 Anglos to try and get a sense of even more data. So I wanted all the data I could get because I really want to find evidence for this threat that Latinos and their children pose for generations. This one, first thing I asked is, surely they aren't going to want to speak English. But then when we look at the 1.5 generation of those who come at a young age and grow up in the United States, essentially they're American culturally, but often immigrants because they're not born here. Some of them undocumented. And the second generation, of course, which we call the second generation Americans, that some people now call anchor babies, to kind of undercut the idea they are Americans. We looked at both those groups, and every group that we looked at, Mexicans, Salvadoran Guatemalans, Chinese, Taiwanese, Koreans, Vietnamese, and Filipinos, a majority of every group spoke English, preferred to speak English at home, even though their parents were immigrants. If you separated these out into the second generation and 1.5, the second generation goes up even higher. We couldn't find these people who are somehow disregarding the importance of English. What about the Mexicans? Because they're the most distinctive group of all. And this thing's kind of working funny on me. If you look just at the Mexicans, even they, by the second generation, a majority prefer to speak English in Southern California. And by the third generation plus, almost everybody prefers to speak English. The problem isn't that they don't learn English. The problem is they learn a language that their grandparents spoke they can't even communicate them effectively in. It's not that people don't want English is the most powerful language in the world, ladies and gentlemen. I give talks all over the world, and they're inevitably in English. No matter how strange the accents. Sometimes they're Swedish, French, German, English from England, probably the funniest one of all. We're all speaking English. Whose idea was it that English is so weak that people are going to come here and not want to partake in the most powerful language of the world? It just doesn't happen in the data. It's the language of education, of jobs, of mobility, of future employment. That doesn't mean people don't cherish the language they have, but as America sucks those languages out of them so fast that we lose the resources we could have used for understanding people we're engaged in wars with, understanding the consumption patterns of people we want to engage with in the global economy. We lose those resources so fast because we suck language out of immigrants. I asked, well, surely people aren't going to have friends who are not Latinos. Why? Because when you get the tweet or the email to start killing people, you have to kill your friends. So in Orange County, I said, we have mainly whites, Asians, and Persians other than Latinos. First generation, 1 out of 10 already has Persian friends, a quarter already have Asian American friends, and 4 out of 10 already have white friends, even in the first generation. Why? Because they came as young kids and they grew up there and they went to school and worked with people. By the second generation, 80% already have white friends. And by the third generation, almost everybody. Contrary to public belief, there are white people left in Southern California. And I want you to remember you heard that here. But we have Asian friends. Who are these people that don't want to integrate socially into the world around them? The next one I think is going to come up is marriage. Because surely you're not going to marry someone who's not Latino, because when you get the tweet, you're going to have to kill your spouse. Now, for some people, that may be a positive thing, but I'm not sure. Unfortunately, the data, once again, despite what we hear from Harvard and Stanford and the airwaves and the media, of course, in the first generation, oh, actually, they skipped my marriage one. In the first generation, immigrants tend to marry other people similar to them. By the second generation, %15 of Latinos in Southern California are already married to non-Latinos. And by the third generation, almost half. Almost half. Who are these people that don't integrate socially into the larger environment? For sociologists, intermarriage is the sine qua non of social integration. And we find it relatively rampant among Latinos by the third generation. Surely, you're not going to lose your religious identity, because if there's nothing more essential in our view of people is their identity as a religious, compassionate person, and that's who you are. Unfortunately, wrong again. The data shows, if it ever comes up here, that by the third generation, half of Latinos already say they're not Catholic. Even in the first generation, many aren't Catholic, contrary to popular belief. Who's doing this? Someone else got a clicker? Even in the first generation, 15% aren't Catholic anymore. Why? Because in the countries they came from, you have evangelicals, Mormons, and everybody else proselytizing. But by the third generation, half of Latinos in Southern California say they're not even Catholic. Why? Because they're not rocks. They change in relationship to the ideas around them. They try new things. They experience new ideas. And they change. They're part of history. And you can see the graph right here. If the Latino threat was true, this red line would stay all the way across in every instance. Language, intermarriage, and friends, there'd be no change. And just to end here then, which one comes up now? It's going to be a surprise for all of us. What about fertility? Surely that's not going to change. If the Latino threat were true, this is Mexican origin women in the census, ages 18 to 44, and the number of children they had. From 1970 to 2000, my friend Frank Bean, who studies this stuff, he's a sociodemographer where I work, if the Latino threat was true, this number would go all the way across and never change. That's 4.4 kids per woman in 1970 for all Mexican origin women in the United States. For Anglo women, or white women, it was 3.5, going down to 1.27, and going down to 1.81 in 2000 for Mexican origin women. If the Latino threat were true, and women were bound to fertility, the number of children they have is never stopping. They couldn't control the fertility. This number would go all the way across, and it doesn't. Latinas, Mexican origin women, like all women in the United States and all women in the world, have reduced their fertility levels over the last 30 years tremendously. More so in the industrialized world. White women have so few children, it creates a demand for immigrant labor. Why? As I told the class today, there are only two ways to get labor in the labor force. When you start creating jobs, the economy gets better. There's only two ways. You either birth them or you import them. We don't make workers. You either birth them or you import them. At this level of fertility, with job demand for a boom, for an economy that's growing, there's just not enough people at entry-level jobs to take that work. We're just not having enough demographic growth. And that's the same in Russia, France, Germany, Italy, Spain. You know, I've been to Italy and Spain. No one has babies. You can throw a rock through a daycare center and not hit a kid. I mean, I wish it wasn't funny, but it is. We're a little better. How many women here want to have 10 kids who are young? No, that's interesting. A generation ago, it's not too uncommon. Now, we chose 18 to 45 in demographics because for the young guys here who don't know women's bodies as well, women don't have that many kids after 45 or 50. And so these are the ages we're looking at. It's called menopause. They take a pause from men. Males have menopause at about 19 and never get over it. But looking at Orange County, just to give you a better sense of what's going on, if we look at all ages of women of Mexican origin, or Latinas actually, these are people then who came as adults to the U.S. and others. They had about 2.38 children per woman, which is almost exactly the same as in Mexico today. For those under 45, you can see the impact of growing up in the United States and being younger. They just don't want to have kids. They're following the white model, basically. Fewer and fewer kids all the time. Creates a demand for immigrant labor. Be patriotic, have 10 kids if you don't like immigration. That's the solution, to tell you the truth. Now, what's interesting here is what? We're spending billions of dollars because Americans like to throw money at problems to build a fence on the U.S.-Mexico border. And let me remind you, half the undocumented people in the United States never crossed a border. They came in as students and flew in as tourists and overstayed their visas. So you could spend $50 billion on the border, and you still have, if there's 12 million now, you still have 6 million undocumented immigrants because they never crossed a border like that, okay? So we throw money at the border. Of course, wait, you can't deport them yet. They haven't finished the wall. It's Mexicans who are building it. But what's going to happen? Demographers tell us that 2.38 births per woman in Mexico is already a reflection of decline in fertility. They're already predicting, the demographers. You know, the Mexican economy, if anybody buys stocks, the stock market in Mexico is doing incredibly well, even though there's a drug war, right? The economy continues. They deal with some of their problems, and the birth rate is so low, they're predicting in 5 to 10 years there won't be enough Mexicans who want to come to work in the United States. So we're going to build this huge fence, then we have to cut little doors out of it and lay $100 bills to get them to come back. Sorry. Why? Because our demand for labor, because we're an aging population with low fertility, is not going to change. Let me end by saying, why not? Because the Latino threat is so negative and so powerful, I call it the black hole of information, you can't see positive contributions. In my book, I talk about why do we have a John Wayne Airport where I live? What's a cowboy? There were no cowboys in New England in the colonial period. There were only cowboys when they came to New Mexico and Texas and assimilated Mexican life. And you can look at my book and look at the whole language of the cowboy today in use, and even then is all Spanish words translated into English. It's an incredible transfiguration. But let's take more contemporary period. You know, I live, there's about a $35, $40 billion agricultural industry. How come U.S. News and World Report doesn't have a cover at Thanksgiving in 2 weeks that has me and my family sitting there looking up saying, thank you, Mexican labor, because if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have this food on our table? Why not? Every year, Mexicans they come here to work, minimum wage, and send $15 billion or more back to their family in Mexico. Why don't we say thank you for that? Because what happens to that money? It goes back to Mexico. They go to Walmart or Costco. It's all down there. They buy American goods because they love American goods. It comes back to us, or what the government gets in taxes is used to pay off the debt to the United States. It's a great Ponzi scheme. We should have a cover saying, thank you. Economists tell us that every year, $7 billion is given free to Social Security by undocumented immigrants. We should have some people my age ready to get their Social Security checks saying, wow, what would we have done without you? Because economists tell us it would have failed without their gifts of money. These are all positive things. I could just go on all night with positive things. But the Latino threat is so strong, and you hear it so pervasive on the airways, in the media, by professors at Stanford and professors at Harvard, that you can't get these ideas across. It becomes very difficult to argue that the children who grew up here, some of my best students who grew up in the United States and speak English and don't even speak Spanish hardly, and we pay for their education, can't work when they graduate because they're undocumented. Is there anything more backwards than that? We invest in them, but we don't allow them to earn the kind of money and pay the taxes that invest in all of us? Or some of the other things that I would argue that are needed. I should stop here because I've run out of time. Thank you very much, and I'll answer any questions you would like.
If you'd like to ask a question, could I get you to line up over here, please?
Good evening.
Hello.
First, I'd like to say with all the information that you've given us today, you can't help but to think who is primarily in control of the media. And for me, I mean, answering this question, I say, okay, rich white men that, have old money and still have power, and control these images that are being sent out to the public. And recently, actually, I was in Texas, in San Antonio, visiting my brother, who's in the Air Force. And One of the things that you mentioned here is that while I was talking to this Mexican who was showing us around San Antonio and kind of giving us the history, is that I was speaking to him in Spanish, and he would just answer me in English at all times, almost like there was this misunderstood, this understood rule that you only have to speak English. You know what I mean, to be a part of the American culture. And lastly, I wanted to tell you, have you ever seen the movie A Day Without Mexicans? It's sort of a comedy, but it does, state.
My friends are in it. So.
Oh, really?
No, it's good points.
I mean, well, actually, the movie says that, it speaks about Mexicans. It speaks about, a world without Mexicans and how, Americans don't really see the work that, is being done.
Great points. Just to comment on a couple of things. It's also rich white men who actually fund the magazines that are pro-immigration as well, just to make sure it's clear. The issue on immigration isn't one that breaks down by political party, actually, and often even by race or ethnic group. It's such a complex issue that there's so many factors involved. So that, for example, Republicans are primarily, at this point, promoting sort of a conservative agenda on immigration, but not all of them. George Bush did a tremendous job getting the Latino vote because he had a very positive view on immigration and the economic value of immigrants to American society. On the other hand, Bill Clinton, supposedly a liberal, passed two of the most difficult immigration laws. Well, one's immigration, one's welfare in 1996. Both those laws had awful impacts on immigrants, and he's a liberal Democrat. Immigration is one of those complex issues. It's really hard to break it down in the way you did, although it's emotional, it's nice that you did it, but you have to look a little deeper sometimes to see that these differences really have to do with a person's positional position, their history, what they think of things, and all kinds of issues. Some of the most virulent anti-immigrant people are immigrants themselves, unfortunately. I remember talking with a guy from Mexico in Chula Vista. I interviewed him, and he was ranting about these Salvadorans. It was 1980s when the Salvadorans and Guatemalans first came. So these foreigners are coming here, they're taking our jobs, they don't belong here, they're not part of our culture, our society. And I said, they're foreigners. And I said, some people might call you a foreigner. He goes, yeah, but I was here first. So I just want to make sure it's clear that I'm not advocating a particular position just based upon genetic makeup of the person taking it. Go ahead.
If you found any significant differences between kind of the Mexican population that you sort of focused on today and other Latino immigrant groups from the Caribbean or South or Central America?
What was the last part of that sentence? It kind of got blurred out.
No, just any kind of differences in some of the patterns and dynamics that you described with with groups from other Latino populations.
I was sort of describing the public's view of Latinos. In reality, Latinos are a very complex and differentiated group. Cubans are very different in the way they came, the education levels they had before they came, and the kind of investment the United States government made in Cubans to make them successful as a way of pointing to the communist world that we're a better nation than they are. And you don't get that with Mexican immigrants. Right? So they're left on their own to make it or not make it. Puerto Ricans, of course, are citizens. And Puerto Ricans, unfortunately, have faced a great deal of discrimination despite being citizens, and particularly in some places in the Northeast. And so each group, and the Salvadorans, of course, and the Nicaraguans, and Guatemalans all left Central America because of a tremendous political upheaval. And they came because they wanted a better life, but they wanted to actually get out of Dodge before they got killed, too. Right? So there's a lot of distinct historical and national differences among Latinos that those of us who study immigration and ethnicity in the United States recognize. I'm talking about a view of Latinos that often homogenizes in the media. And I don't necessarily buy that homogenized view. I think it's really important when we talk to really differentiate. Cuban Americans are incredibly successful as a group. That's a lot different than Cubans and Mexican Americans. So yeah, there are some distinct differences. Go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. Actually, you've already answered the question I came up to, but I'm going to address it again, and then a comment, and I'd like to react to it if you may. That is, you say you're a anthropologist and a social scientist, and not a political scientist. Nonetheless, I wanted you to comment on the fact that a very large Spanish-speaking population, namely the Cubans, have been the recipients of very, very special migration policies, and so everything is political when it comes right down to it. And the unfairness was with the advantages given for political reasons, given to the Cuban Americans in Florida, New Jersey, and California has to be addressed, I think, when talking about the Hispanic world within the United States. And second of all, I just want to say that your line of argument backed by empirical evidence is most convincing to all of us, I'm sure. However, it doesn't carry water when you're talking to the Buchanans of the world in their ilk. Those people, in contemporary terms, those in the so-called teabag movement, because, quite frankly, they're nativist, racist, and know-nothing attitudes don't respond to your kinds of lines of argument. Because really one commentator has said, I'll finish here, one commentator has said, reality for these people is optional.
Right. I think the investment in refugees who came to the United States in the 1970s and 1980s, both from Indochina and Southeast Asia and Cuba, are an example of what we can do if we really want to integrate people. And I think the Cuban example, as Latinos, and how they become so successful, is an example. When you break down the barriers to integration, you provide education classes, you provide the kind of classes that allow people to achieve in this country. By God, they achieve. I mean, it's no mystery. So I don't hold it against the Cubans that they've received special treatment. I use it as an example of what you can do when you actually provide the kind of benefits like a place like Canada actually does for immigrants, whether refugees or not. The last point about the Tea Party, I mean, I don't know what to say. I think, I find crazies all over the place, whether in the Tea Party, sometimes in the Democratic Party, and right now they have a lot of political movement, and I kind of wish they were much sharper on the immigration issues rather than just so emotional about it. But the problem I have is not just them. I can go to Harvard, I can go to Stanford, I can go to middle line magazines like Atlantic Monthly. I can find similar kinds of rants and paranoid kind of stories being told. And so it's not just peculiar to them. And some of the information they get comes from these everyday, middle of the road media. And the problem is, sometimes I talk to Latinos. Latinos listen to Rush Limbaugh too. And they start telling me the same stories. Unfortunately, those are the access to information most Americans have. Most Americans don't get to hear the great talk you just heard. And so we don't have, the views I'm telling you now, there's no Fox News for, what would you call it, I guess, Conchito News, right, that tells you this sort of thing, right? It's basically, the media is so one-sided, it's hard to get alternative views. So you have Latinos, you have minorities of all persuasions, just like the Tea Party, who tell me the exact same things. I think the Tea Party has managed to get a lot of play out of it, unfortunately, but so have a lot of others, unfortunately, too. That doesn't mean I'm voting Tea Party, though.
I just have a couple of comments. On one of your graphs, you had three kinds of people. You had whites, Asians, and Persians. Well, to my view, I think of Persians as Caucasian and as Asian, both. and second, I realize that there's a lot of this media bias against Latinos and a lot of fear about that whole Reconquest, yeah, and so forth, the Reconquest. But there's another side to it too, and this is mainly because of the media that I know this. But every person in this room, every single person in this room knows that a lot of their food is grown and picked by Mexicans.
And Jamaicans on the East Coast, of course, and others. But if the demographic shift in Mexico occurs, as I've been saying, it's probably be more Eastern Europeans and Chinese that will be picking your food pretty soon, actually. But just to let you know, it's going to be a lot of changes if the demographics hold up. Because we're going to still want someone to pick our food and grow it. So thank you very much. That was good comments.
This thing about Americans wanting their country back, who took it away? Who took it away from them?
No one yet.
Yeah. Why did they lose it? Well, about 30 years ago, I wrote a letter about people who whites afraid of becoming a minority in their own land, quote unquote. Well, I said, well, they simply have to close the golden door to any and all non-white immigration. the only way out for them.
Yeah, I guess basically I think there's been a shift since that 1990 image I showed you. I don't think you see that image anymore. I think there's much more sense of we're a multicultural nation to a certain extent, and you wouldn't see that kind of image anymore because they want to sell magazines to other people too. I guess what I try to argue is that it's sort of what we heard back in World War II. The only thing to fear is fear itself. And the more we let fear grip us and taint the way we think about ourselves and people we live with, the more self-fulfilling prophecies we're going to create. We don't want people to be part of our circle. We're going to push them out. Pretty soon, they'll feel, I don't want to be part of your circle. So they turn to more negative approaches to life in the United States. I just think all these things sort of feed on each other. So I'm basically very positive about the future of America because I see America as a place where we still do allow differences to occur. And I think we just have to keep fighting for those differences to be allowed to flourish. I think people who fear that the United States is being lost, I think are basically underestimating the power of the United States and the culture of the United States to change, to absorb, to look different tomorrow than it looks today, but still retain the essence of what it means to be an American. And that doesn't mean that people have to take off their ethnic clothing to be an American, but they will. But they're also going to add some stuff to what we think is American that's going to look a little bit different. It's basically my point of view as an anthropologist is these changes are occurring in all directions at all times, and it makes us a great place because we don't try and fight it continually, and we never have fought it continually. We've resisted it. At the same time, we sort of enjoyed it. Right? I was telling the students that in Little Italy, where I just showed you, that's now mainly Chinese and Korean, did the Italians give up in their little restaurants? They make pizzas with kimchi. They make a lot of money. Right? They adapted. That's what we are as people. We're adapting. And that's what I think America is all about. And I think what is quintessentially American today, what may look foreign or weird today, will be American tomorrow. And we're going to forget that we ever hassled over it. That's what I think. But go ahead.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm an economics major here. I wanted to talk about the push to expect Latinos to speak English and how they are going to not move and they're always going to speak Spanish. I think that's what you said the big fear is. And they're using the Quebec analysis. And the whole reason Quebec became an alienated region and started only speaking French, they also do speak English, but French is their first language. The whole reason was because Ottawa in the 19th century forced them to speak English and set up all these regulations to force them to speak English, so they revolted against it. So I'd argue that as the United States, for a counteraction to prevent this part of the United States to become like Quebec, we'd have to come up with a regulation that doesn't force them to speak English. That's my comment.
I don't think you have to force anybody to speak English. It's such a powerful language that people run to it. And our ability to bring people into English is so much stronger than the 19th century. The 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s, those people we saw in that picture, the mechanisms for change today in America are the television, radio, internet is all absorbing, the education system, absorbing people so fast that sometimes they lose the qualities that for those of us who study immigrant adaptation, we wish they held on to a little longer. And that's the same thing. We wish, the problem is Americans have such a fear of multilingualism. It's just, my neighbors are Swiss. He speaks 13 languages. His kids speak 3 or 4 languages, and they're only like 14 years old. I mean, they have no fear of language. They teach their kids languages from the minute they wake up. German, Swiss German, French, Spanish, and goes on. I mean, they just have no fear. But Americans, we have a huge fear of different languages, unfortunately. And cognitively, I think it's better to speak more languages. But that's another story. English is so strong in the world. The problem isn't that it's weak. The problem is it absorbs so much of other people's languages, actually. And I think Spanish is a beautiful language. Chinese is a beautiful language. It's fun to learn different languages. And unfortunately, it's not our policy. Go ahead.
We'll finish after these 4 questions.
Good evening and welcome to Rhode Island. As you probably know, the legal immigration process is very long and tedious.
Yeah.
What do you think you can do to streamline it? And I also have a second question.
What was the first one?
The legal immigration process is very long and tedious. What do you think can be done to streamline and shorten it?
Sure.
And as for the second question, do you think that things could get so bad that we could have like a Chinese Exclusion Act except for Latinos?
Two good questions. I mean, I'm not a government person, policymaker, But it's clear you have a problem when it could take 20 years to immigrate your children if they aren't born here, if you're not a citizen, if you're a legal resident. My students who marry people who are non-citizens, the law says now because of Bill Clinton that they have to leave the country for 10 years, right, if they're undocumented. So they get married, one lives in Mexico or wherever it is, and they have to wait this whole time to get back together. When you have that kind of waiting period to reunite a family, what you're really doing is pushing undocumented migration, because people will do the paperwork and then come in because it's a natural human tendency to be together. And so what you really do is creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of undocumented migration by making it so hard for people to satisfy those kind of reuniting. I would figure out a way to make it, to streamline it. Why not? Why not make people happy? Why should my students who marry someone have to sit there and wonder if it's going to be 10 years before they get to see this person because it's illegal for them to come back into the country because they got married here and not someplace else? It's an amazing fear. And we didn't have that before 1996. You married someone, a citizen, that citizen got a chance to bring their spouse into the country relatively easily, right? So long as they could prove that they were actually cohabitating, not green card for sale. And the second part was a Chinese Exclusion Act for Latinos. You know, Latinos, you're talking about recent immigrants and new immigrants coming to work in this country because of the labor demand. Right now, the labor demand is low. That's what creates the flow, because it's an economic flow. People come to work. There's much fewer people crossing the border. Once the economy turns around, it's beginning to turn around, and once the unemployed at the level of low skill, low educated gets sucked in, which isn't any of the students here, because employers often want people at that entry level to start working, not necessarily someone with a BA to help expand a business. Once they get sucked in, you can have another demand. And I think Mexico is going to be sought after again, at least economically, if not culturally, and politically, with not some problems. I don't think there'll be a Chinese Exclusion Act. I could give you examples, but for 150 years, every time the public has gotten upset about immigration, and the Congress has passed restrictive immigration policies to show the public that we're doing something about immigration, they always created a backdoor to make sure that the business of America, which is business, never slows down. And I could just give you example after example after example, because those people who run the country know that business needs workers. And no matter what they tell the public in terms of restrictive immigration law, there's always a way to bring somebody else in. It's just part of who we are. You know, we rely on immigrants for a lot of what we don't want to do as citizens. So I don't think there'll be a Mexican Exclusion Act. It'd be the opposite, figuring out ways to get them here. We've always promoted Mexican immigration. You have to understand that we constructed Mexican immigration. In the early 1900s, we sent recruiters into Mexico. Then we created guest worker programs, both in the 1910s and also in 1942 to 1964. We built the railroads in Mexico that run south to north from the populated areas to the empty border, and then crossed over to catch up with the American trains to take them all over the Midwest, South, and East. We did everything we could structurally and culturally to create a culture of migration to the United States, and we're not going to give that up. What's going to change it is demographic change and economic growth in Mexico.
Hi, I want to thank you for coming to the University of Rhode Island and giving us an informative presentation that was well needed. All of the points that you made today, I wish could be a public service announcement to all of Americans like the presidents do, because it's something that is needed and it's something that we need to hear about and it's something that needs to be talked about instead of us watching these Time magazine articles where Mexicans and Latinos are just dehumanized. It is because of these I believe that it's because of these immigration reform laws that Latinos are at the bottom of the barrel. I meet Latinos every day because I'm a food stamp outreach worker who cannot work because of their immigration statuses. Because of their status, they're homeless, they have access to basically nothing. Or they work in the kitchen as bussers and cooks and stuff. But I feel personally that education is the key. Some illegal immigrants want an education but are unable to get that due to current legislation. They come here to be basically poor. Some women are sex trafficked. They come to America and they think they're coming here for a better life, and then it's a different story when they get here. My question to you is, what do you think the government should do to help immigrants gain citizenship legally?
Those are good questions and very good points, and I thank you for those comments. Let me say, to begin with, in case you are mistaken, that somehow I don't see immigration and complexity that it is. Immigration is about costs and benefits, right? I'm not arguing that immigration is always a benefit, but I'm also arguing against those who argue it's always a cost. It's a balancing act. Sometimes it costs us, and sometimes it benefits us. I think overall, in the greater scheme of things, we benefit from the balance, that we basically benefit, we always have as a nation. So that's my basic point. I recognize that it's costly for local governments. Why? Because that's where education takes place, policing takes place, some of the other issues that take place are all local costs. I also recognize the nation and the states benefit greatly from their presence. That may have a problem of getting translated down economically to the local level. So schools have a problem, right? Schools have a problem. Hospitals have a problem. But that doesn't mean there's not value being created that's going somewhere else. The issue is how to get that value back to the local level for me. I just don't demonize immigrants in the story. I demonize the lack of reciprocity between different levels of government to give back the kind of value they're creating to make local governments more saleable, basically, so that they're able to survive, because that's where the economic impact is, right? I'm willing to have that discussion. I see costs and benefits. How to make things better? You can get rid of illegal immigration tomorrow by making people legal. That's basically, there's no difference between illegal and illegal. It's just the politics that determines whether you're letting some in legally and some illegally. The economic reality is, when the economy turns around, we're going to need X number of people. The politics are, we're not going to let X number of people in. But we all going to wink and know we want them here, right? Whether we admit it or not, right? And so I would just basically ask the government to come up with comprehensive immigration reform. Republicans and Democrats work together like they used to. Simpson-Mazzoli bill. Democrats and Republicans used to be able to sit down and hammer these things out. The Republicans have interest in business and workers to stimulate those businesses and ensure economic growth when the economy is growing. Democrats want to talk about immigrant rights, guaranteeing integration, access to citizenship issues. Bring them together. Right now, they're so stalemated on every single issue that they can't even sit down to figure out what their best interests are to come up with a solution so that it's a win-win situation for everybody. What we have now is a no-win situation for everybody. And I think it's a failure of government. And it's not blamed on one side or the other side. They're in cahoots in this. And maybe it's politics because of the election, or the next election, or the next election. But I find it disgraceful. And I also find it disgraceful that we don't stand up as a nation, just as we did when we had slaves, and say, as a nation that wants to be the moral leader of the world, to have people working in indentured servitude, making my life better, and I take advantage of that every single day of my life. And I don't stand up to make a moral statement and say, I'm not going to support that anymore. And yet I benefit so much by it. It's like, where's the outrage? Where's the outrage in the slavery in America today? It's just, you can see, ladies and gentlemen, the kind of lifestyle that people I've interviewed live in. It would make you sick. It would make you sick, the kind of stuff people endure to make sure that my middle-class lifestyle is the one that I can enjoy. I mean, I just wish you could come and do some of the interviews I've done. See people crying, telling me their stories, the abuses they've had, the kind of honor and dignity they see in their work history, even though for us we see them as low paid and doing the kind of job we would never do, but finding a dignity in it, finding a way of thinking in themselves and having value, of contributing to this nation. Now, those are the stories I hear every day. So I see the costs, I see the benefits, and we need to bring people together to really kind of work out solutions. I'm not a politician or somebody who can even come up with policy, but I can bring stories about why we need to think about that and how immoral it is for us to continue in the situation we're in. They should really find a solution.
Yeah, I have two things. First of all, thank you very much for what you had to say. I really appreciate that very much. Two things. Margaret Mead was here in 1970 at the University of Rhode Island.
Oh, you're kidding?
And, yes.
Oh, well,
and
I'm going to step back a little bit. She was great.
I'm sure her ghost is here in this room tonight. Even though she wasn't talking about immigration, she talked about people going to the moon, and for the first time looking back from the moon onto the earth and seeing it as one ball and seeing no borders. And the fact that resources have no borders, people's monies from other parts of the world have no borders. Their oil, their gas, their food have no borders. The only borders are these artificial borders that keep people out. But we're willing to take everything else across the border without any kind of immigration policy. So that would be the first thing. And then the second thing is NAFTA and these trade agreements that are causing the immigration issue in the first place, that a lot of people don't want to leave home, as you know this, I'm sure you know this. They don't want to leave their mother and their father and their sick kids and so forth. So it is political in that sense too, because we make these policies that drive people to leave their home.
No, I appreciate both your comments. Raising the specter of Margaret Mead, of course, is difficult for an anthropologist, but one of my favorite quotes of Margaret Mead is the following, more or less. Never forget that one person can make a difference to change the world. And I think Margaret Mead really said it well, and I could never say it as eloquently as her. In terms of the second part of your comment, which now I've kind of forgotten actually, NAFTA. I think what you're talking about are unintended consequences of policies. So NAFTA, which we do a great thing in the sense we create like a European Union in the Western Hemisphere, right? European Union allows capital to move in Europe, in the EU, freely. But they also do another thing. They allow people to move freely in the European Union. We took that idea, allowed capital to move, but we didn't allow people. And it's very difficult to have an economic organization that's supranational in that sense. And Europe did it right, but we're making it very complicated. And NAFTA, of course, as you know, North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, reduced the tariff on corn, which means that in Mexico you have to compete with Iowa for corn production, which means there were probably 10 million Mexican peasant farm owners, who couldn't compete any longer with the United States, who became people who had to basically migrate to work, sometimes to Mexico City, sometimes the United States. That's all a result of those policies, actually. And unintended consequences are happening all the time. We don't like illegal immigration, so we beef up the border. We make it more difficult for people to cross. When I first started studying undocumented immigration in the early 1980s, I took my class, we'd go walk across the border all the time. I'd show them where people are crossing. We'd go at night with the Border Patrol. We'd talk to people as they're crossing. They'd wish each other luck and say, see you in LA. Very easy. What did it mean? It means people would come, they'd work for 8 to 10 months, a year maybe, and go home. There was a flow back and forth. For every 10 people coming from Mexico at that time, about 8 went back within a year or so. We don't like illegal immigration. We make it more difficult. Suddenly you have a barrier. So what happens when you have a barrier? People cross. They don't want to go back. It's too hard to get back over, particularly women. You get raped. I mean, it's just terrorizing to cross the border illegally for a woman, let alone a man. So what happens is more people cross. They don't go back. You have more undocumented immigrants to the United States than ever before, because we've now made it this group of people who, even though they want to go home after a short period, can't. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in that sense. It's an unintended consequence of policy. Good idea, keep them out, but once they're in, they don't want to leave. It's just too difficult to get back.
Firstly, I would just like to ask everyone in here, how many of you, like me, were told to do well in school and pursue an education so you didn't have to break your back like your parents did? And now, do you believe that there are too many jobs for citizens of this country, or do you were talking about the call for labor, or do you believe that there are too few citizens willing to do the jobs?
God, that's a tough question, tough answer. I think that right now in an economic recession, there are not enough jobs for anybody. So a lot of citizens are out of work and would like to work. And there are a lot of immigrants who would like to work who aren't coming or are here and are out of work. The difference between the immigrant and the citizen, particularly the undocumented immigrant, is mobility. If you're unemployed here in Kingston, I don't think you're going to pick up and come wash dishes where I live. Why? Because we have an infrastructure of support that helps you survive. Now, an undocumented immigrant doesn't have that. They're here, there's no job. They hear there's a job in Oregon, they're gone. And so, in a sense, it's not a matter of too many jobs and too little jobs. It's what you're willing to do to go get that job, and how, where's your social safety net, basically. And when the economy turns around, I think what you're going to have are jobs for citizens, but because of our our fertility rate's not as bad as Europe's. Why? Because we have more immigrants in Europe. And, but you're still going to have a demand for low-skilled, unskilled labor for some employers. That many of you who are citizens, once you get reabsorbed into jobs you really want, are going to look down on those jobs and not. Well, you may be willing to take them now, here in this area, right? When you're in school as a student, you may be willing to work in jobs that you don't see as your future. But once you move out of those, you don't want to go back. It's very difficult to go back. And so unless there are others who are willing to sacrifice themselves economically because of recession, there's going to create a demand for labor. And it's pretty clear. So I think there's right now just not enough jobs for citizens or immigrants. And I think that's why everyone's struggling and why the Tea Party has so much effectiveness, because people really want more jobs. Because the capitalism is based upon one premise: more jobs created today than yesterday. And that's what we all want as capitalists. Why? Because you have jobs, I get my Social Security, I get my health care. It works for us. But that means we have to generate jobs constantly. And if we don't generate people for those jobs, we have to bring people in to satisfy that labor demand. That's all I'm saying. So yeah, I think the problem is when people argue that somehow immigrants are taking U.S. citizen jobs, I find that really sad, actually, the displacement issue. Because it really means once we're not in a recession like this, let's say in a regular period of economic growth of 3%, 3.5%, even something similar like that, what that means is that who's competing with somebody who comes from Latin America, let's say, with a 3rd to 4th or 5th grade education, maybe 9th grade education, doesn't have family here, doesn't have a lot of social networks, doesn't have English skills, doesn't have a lot of experience in manufacturing or industrial trade, or even in say, building houses. Why would an American citizen feel competitive with that person? And it's typically people who don't graduate high school that feel the competition more directly, which to me is a basic argument for a failure in our education system, for not training American citizens not to feel they have to compete with workers at that level of competence. It's just, to me, an amazing thing that we turn it around and blame the immigrant when we should be focusing on policies of education and job growth. Why is it where I live that, for example, in, say, southeast LA, nobody wants to put jobs. There's no Macy's down there. There's no manufacturing plant in South Central and Compton, right? Why are there so many in Orange County where I live? It's like you can't even turn the corner without a manufacturing place, like some sort of production going on. Why is it so hard? Why does it take 8 hours to get a bus to come over here from Compton, where you have a lot of Latinos and African Americans living, to come to Orange County to take those jobs? I'd argue about that. I'd argue about the education system in those areas, right? But immigrants are a pretty convenient scapegoat, I think, in so many ways. So I guess your question opens up to me a whole series of issues that go way beyond how many jobs there are. It's who you produce for those jobs, why are some American citizens handicapped for those jobs, and why aren't the jobs there where those people need them? And who put the policies of putting jobs in mainly suburban areas where I live? That's exactly true. No, should you? Well, should you? If we're training you to want to be basically someone who wants to wash dishes all their life, we failed you as an education system. You're basically someone who we're training you to be a leader, someone who has managerial skills, someone who's basically going to be working with immigrants as a workforce. And I think that's important for you. I'm glad you recognize that, because if we were training you to be a dishwasher or a ditch digger, we'd really be. And those are honorable jobs, right? And the jobs that people's parents all had, and I think many Americans would do them in a second if they paid well enough. And it's just there's nothing dishonorable about that. It's just we're not training you to do that. And I think for all the students here, because we're going to give you an education with higher ambitions, who's going to take care of you? Who's going to take care of you? Who's going to cut your hair? Immigrants. Who's going to do your? I don't think you probably go and have your toenails and nails done. But if you did, it'd be an immigrant. I guarantee it. You're not going to want to basically. Maybe you'll do your yard. Maybe you won't. Probably you won't, because somebody's going to come, an immigrant, and do your yard, make your clothes. I mean, I can just go on and on. So we're going to produce you, because that's our nature. Because you're going to be very productive. You're going to create a great amount of wealth, but you're going to spend a lot of that wealth on people to service you to make your life better. And those are going to be, in many cases, immigrants. Thank you very much. It looks like I'm being canceled here.